Gino stormed into the room, eyes locked on Jasmine, and you could feel the tension crackling in the air. The last time these two were in the same house, everything was calm, well, as calm as it ever gets in this drama, but now, betrayal hung heavier than ever. Jasmine tried to keep her composure, but the weight of what she had done was written all over her face. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of everyone watching, wondering how this would explode. Why would someone risk a friendship, a reputation, and even their own sense of peace just to keep secrets that are begging to be revealed? This isn't just another fight over jealousy. This is years of broken trust colliding head-on with public humiliation, and nobody knows who will come out standing. Everyone in the house is sizing each other up, alliances shifting like quicksand, whispers filling the spaces between conversations. Every glance, every pause, every innocent comment could spark another confrontation. And just when you think someone might back down, a quiet remark sets off a chain reaction that nobody saw coming. The air feels electric, loaded with unspoken accusations and unfinished business, and you know deep down this night isn't ending peacefully. Everyone is about to be forced to pick sides, confront old wounds, and face consequences that have been simmering under the surface for months. Gino confronting Jasmine might just be the spark that ignites the entire house, and nobody is safe from the fallout. The house was buzzing with energy as everyone settled back in after the last episode. And if you remember, things ended on a note that left a lot of unresolved tension. Gino was still simmering over Jasmine's betrayal, and the echoes of arguments from the resort were clearly lingering in the air. Julia had dropped hints about not trusting some of the new arrivals, while Joy and Elizabeth were quietly picking sides, already sizing each other up. Andre was pacing, trying to figure out how to navigate a house full of people who were either on his side or waiting to watch him slip up. Lauren and Kara, meanwhile, seemed calm on the surface, but you could tell they were bracing for the inevitable drama that always seemed to follow when these personalities came together. It was like stepping into a house where everyone already has their own secret scorecards, and you can almost feel the tension stretching across the rooms. Gino tried to keep a low profile, but his presence alone was enough to make Jasmine hesitate in her conversations. You know that moment when someone says one small thing and suddenly everyone notices? Yeah, that was happening constantly. The kitchen felt like a minefield, every compliment, every eye roll, every polite laugh carried extra weight. New arrivals were trickling in, and with them came new energy, but also the potential for immediate awkwardness. People were greeting each other with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, and the subtle side glances and whispered comments were already hinting at future confrontations. Julia, in particular, seemed to be carefully observing who spoke to whom, making mental notes that might come in handy later. Joy had already started her little campaigns of influence, leaning into people's insecurities and testing reactions, while Elizabeth and Andre quietly watched, trying to gauge whether it was worth engaging or just letting the chaos unfold. And then there was that first small moment that made you raise an eyebrow. Someone tried to make a casual joke, but it landed all wrong, instantly creating a ripple of discomfort across the group. You could see the tiny spark of tension flare up, a reminder that in this house, no one's guard can ever drop completely. Every subtle smirk, every nervous laugh, every misplaced comment seemed to foreshadow that something bigger was brewing, and you just knew it wasn't going to stay small for long. Even in these quiet moments, the slightest glance or tone could trigger a chain reaction, and you could feel the house teetering on the edge before the real confrontations even begin. Tensions were rising faster than anyone expected. Gino wasn't just mad, he was visibly hurt, and every small movement from Jasmine seemed to fuel the fire. She tried to keep her cool, but her nervous glances and half-smiles betrayed the guilt that lingered just beneath the surface. You could see it in the way she hovered near certain people, subtly trying to gather allies, while simultaneously avoiding Gino's direct gaze. It was like watching someone tiptoe across a field full of hidden landmines, knowing one wrong step could set off an explosion. Meanwhile, Julia and Joy were already stirring the pot. Julia seemed to have made it her mission to comment on the smallest slip-ups, and Joy, with that sly grin, kept whispering observations that made others question their own memories of past events. Alliances were forming quietly. You know that moment when you start noticing who sits near whom, who laughs at whose jokes, and suddenly realize that every minor interaction carries hidden strategy. That was happening constantly. Elizabeth and Andre, while quieter, were scanning every interaction, trying to determine when to step in, or whether to step in at all. And Lauren, visibly tense, was bracing herself for confrontation, already imagining worst-case scenarios in her head. Then there was the issue of Jasmine's past behavior, the elephant in the room that nobody could ignore. The whispers about her interactions with Matt had already begun, with some accusing, some defending, and some quietly shocked. Even minor miscommunications, like who texted whom first or who laughed at whose joke, began to carry heavier meaning. People were reading between the lines, assuming intent where there might not have been any, but in a house like this, perception becomes reality. Gino's defensiveness wasn't just anger, it was self-preservation, an attempt to regain control in a situation where he felt constantly undermined. Secondary storylines added more complexity. Julia's pregnancy secrecy, for instance, created subtle but charged tension. The way she avoided certain topics, the careful phrasing of her statements, even the timing of when she appeared in shared spaces, all of it was scrutinized by the rest of the house. Little fights started popping up in corners. A disagreement over chores, an offhand comment about cooking skills, someone commenting on someone else's luggage. Each seemed minor on its own, but layered together, they were building a combustible environment. Behavioral patterns were obvious if you paid attention. Gino tended to confront directly, but only when he felt backed into a corner. Jasmine avoided confrontation until it became unavoidable, then overreacted in ways that made people question her motives. Julia often pushed boundaries subtly, waiting to see how far she could go before someone snapped. Joy acted like a provocateur, testing emotional responses and watching the fallout like it was a social experiment. These patterns, repeated across multiple scenarios, made it clear that conflicts were less about isolated incidents and more about long-standing behavioral dynamics. Psychologically, you could understand why alliances were forming. People naturally seek safety and validation, especially when past betrayals and ongoing suspicions make the environment unpredictable. The house was a microcosm of social power struggles, and everyone was trying to secure their place, even if it meant manipulating or provoking others. Watching it unfold, you start to see how guilt, jealousy, and fear of judgment can amplify reactions beyond what the initial conflict warranted. And just when you thought the tension might ease, a subtle comment in the living room set the stage for something much bigger. A quiet remark about past loyalty, barely audible, was enough to shift the entire energy of the room. Eyes darted, bodies stiffened, and you could feel the silent countdown to an explosive confrontation. Something is about to blow up in this house, and it's only a matter of time before private grudges turn into a full-scale clash. The air in the house was thick with tension, so thick you could practically slice it with a knife. Gino and Jasmine were circling each other, words sharp but measured, every syllable loaded with years of unresolved hurt. You could see Gino's jaw tight every time Jasmine tried to explain herself, his eyes flashing with disbelief and betrayal. Jasmine, on the other hand, was walking that thin line between defensiveness and charm, attempting to sway anyone who would listen while avoiding Gino's gaze. Could you handle being in the middle of this storm and not lose it? Their confrontation started subtly. A comment about trust slipped into a casual conversation, and suddenly Gino snapped. He confronted Jasmine directly, not holding back, recalling details of her past betrayals, making it clear that nothing had been forgotten. Her reactions were telling. Flustered, evasive, sometimes sharp, sometimes apologetic, but every response seemed to fan the flames rather than calm them. Observing this, you could almost read their history in their body language. The hesitations, the eye rolls, the tense shoulders. Each small gesture told a story of loyalty broken, promises shattered, and emotions ignored for too long. Meanwhile, Andre and Joy were in their own corner of the house, escalating quietly but intensely. Joy, with that trademark sly humor, kept dropping subtle digs, while Andre tried to maintain composure, only to snap at the tiniest provocation. Could you imagine staying calm while someone constantly questions your motives in front of an audience? The tension between them was a slow burn, punctuated by sharp barbs and silent stares, each one feeding off the other. A misinterpreted comment sent Andre storming out, only to circle back moments later with a fiery rebuttal. The room was a chessboard, and every move carried potential for public humiliation. Layered into these confrontations were the minor conflicts that kept building. Julia, still navigating her pregnancy secrecy, inadvertently became part of overheard gossip, drawing reactions from Elizabeth and Lauren. Side comments, laughter that seemed a little too loud, and casual glances created microdramas that added fuel to the already roaring fires. Every time someone left the room, you could almost hear the group mentally replaying every interaction, dissecting tone, intent, and consequence. It was relentless, Unexpected arrivals intensified the chaos. Kara wandered in, seemingly innocuous, but her presence alone shifted group dynamics. People scrambled subtly, adjusting their conversations, watching what she said, gauging whether she would become a temporary ally or just another judge. Gino's attention flicked to her occasionally, a reminder that he had to balance confrontation with observation. Meanwhile, Jasmine tried to rally support, her efforts partially successful, partially ignored, leaving her in a precarious social position that only added pressure. Past betrayals resurfaced constantly. Jasmine's history with Matt and Gino was replayed in every interaction, every glance, and every whispered comment. Gino, frustrated and exhausted, couldn't help but voice his pain repeatedly, forcing Jasmine to confront the consequences of her actions in front of the entire house. And just when the tension seemed like it might reach a peak, Joy whispered a side comment about loyalty and deception, sending Andre into another spiral of indignation. It was a chain reaction, with each tiny spark threatening to ignite the whole room. Behaviorally, you could map out the triggers. Gino's confrontations were direct, aimed at clearing the air and asserting boundaries. Jasmine's attempts to manipulate perception were subtle, using charm, deflection, and selective confession. Joy and Julia thrived in the gray areas, testing emotional limits and watching the fallout. Elizabeth, Lauren, and the others oscillated between spectators and reluctant participants, carefully choosing when to intervene and when to stay silent. The whole house was a living, breathing experiment in tension, alliances, and emotional endurance. And then the moment came. A whispered accusation about past dishonesty reached Jasmine in the kitchen while Gina was elsewhere, and her reaction, sharp, incredulous, defensive, set off a chain of responses. People turned, voices rose, and what began as a quiet accusation became a full-blown argument with multiple participants. Overheard secrets collided with half-remembered conversations, and suddenly everyone was entangled in a web of conflict they couldn't easily escape. Amid all this chaos, tiny victories and humiliations punctuated the emotional storm. Jasmine managed a few small alliances, earning quiet nods from some housemates, while Gino scored moments of moral authority that reinforced his stance in the eyes of others. Every glance, every comment, every misstep was magnified, feeding the drama and keeping the tension unbearable yet irresistible. Just when it seemed the confrontations might plateau, an unexpected twist loomed. Someone quietly mentioned a detail about the previous season, something minor on the surface, but loaded with potential fallout. Eyes widened, whispers started, and you could sense the room holding its collective breath. Everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one yet had the full picture. The storm isn't over. A secret is about to surface that could flip alliances and ignite the next confrontation beyond anything anyone expects. The mood in the house shifted subtly but unmistakably. You could feel it in the way people lingered near the kitchen, leaning in just a little too close, nodding when someone spoke, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. Every whisper, every side-eye, every casual laugh became part of a larger undercurrent. Alliances were forming, unspoken but powerful, and just as quickly, small cracks began to show in the supposedly solid bonds. Jasmine, still trying to manage the narrative, moved carefully, gauging who was likely to support her and who might quietly undermine her. She leaned into charm with a few housemates, dropped a subtle comment about Gino, and immediately noticed the ripple. Heads turned, eyebrows raised, and someone muttered under their breath. That tiny maneuver, almost invisible to the casual observer, sent waves across the room. People were silently choosing sides, calculating the potential benefits and risks of aligning with one person over another. Meanwhile, Gino watched cautiously, aware that every glance and gesture could influence opinions about him. He didn't overreact. But his measured responses spoke volumes. It wasn't just about defending himself, it was about signaling integrity while others jockeyed for position. Even minor actions, like staying silent during a heated exchange or offering a small nod of support to a housemate, carried weight in the group's perception. Social dynamics in the house were proving to be as volatile as the major confrontations themselves. Joy and Julia thrived in this environment. They circulated, asking subtle questions, making casual remarks, and letting their body language communicate more than their words. Each interaction was carefully calculated to gauge reactions, test loyalties, and sometimes provoke minor tension for entertainment. What seemed playful to the casual eye was really strategy. Observing, evaluating, and influencing without stepping directly into conflict. Elizabeth and Lauren quietly exchanged notes with others, silently assessing the balance of power. They weighed past grievances against current behavior, deciding who was trustworthy and who was likely to fold under pressure. Each small interaction, the way someone laughed at a comment, the hesitation before replying, fed into their mental calculus. Human psychology was on full display, with the housemates constantly reading intentions, projecting motives, and adjusting alliances. Even Kara, who seemed almost peripheral, became a subtle influencer. Her presence alone shifted conversations. People were cautious about sharing too much, wondering how her perspective might be reported back to Jasmine or Gino. Social signaling in this house was relentless. Gestures, microexpressions, and quiet positioning all became tools in a silent power struggle. Minor actions sparked disproportionately large reactions. A casual laugh turned into whispered speculation. A side glance became interpreted as a secret alliance forming. Even being excluded from a small conversation carried weight, reinforcing insecurities and triggering defensive behavior. You could see it in the way housemates lingered, poised to intervene, or in the brief flinch when someone approached. Every movement was amplified by the watchful eyes of others, creating a feedback loop where tension fed tension. As the night wore on, the alliances felt both solid and precarious. People had bonded over shared judgments, mutual frustrations, and the thrill of gossip, but no one was immune to betrayal. A misstep by one housemate could unravel support in an instant. Loyalty was conditional, built on convenience and perception, and every whispered conversation risked exposure. At the same time, anticipation was building. Someone in the house was about to confront another about a secret overheard or a misstep witnessed. The stage was set for a dramatic collision of intentions and perceptions, with multiple housemates' reputations hanging in the balance. One alliance could crumble at any moment, and when it does, the fallout will shock everyone and flip the house upside down. The house finally settled into an uneasy quiet, but the tension lingered like a thick fog. Faces that had been animated with gossip and confrontation earlier now carried a mixture of shame, embarrassment, and relief. Some laughed nervously, trying to mask regret over words they couldn't take back. Others stared off into space, processing the intensity of what had just unfolded. You could almost hear the mental notes ticking in everyone's head. Who had made a fool of themselves, who had played their hand too boldly, and who had managed to hold their ground. Gino paced quietly, still simmering from the confrontation with Jasmine. His body language was tense but controlled, a stark contrast to the earlier outburst that had shocked everyone. It was clear that he was reflecting on what had happened, weighing his next moves. Did he overreact or simply stand up for himself? Could he have handled it differently without losing credibility? His silence spoke volumes, and those watching knew that the next interaction could either restore his position or complicate it further. Jasmine, meanwhile, retreated to a corner, her confident facade slightly cracked. The previous bravado gave way to introspection, and you could see her calculating which alliances had held strong and which had faltered. Was she underestimating how others perceived her actions? Did she expect Gino to respond the way he did? Observing her behavior, it was easy to understand why some housemates had quietly distanced themselves, while others had reluctantly aligned with her. Joy and Julia, ever the social navigators, compared notes in hushed tones. Their earlier provocations had paid off, giving them leverage, but there was a subtle recognition that pushing too far could backfire. Their smiles were slightly tighter, and their laughter more cautious. Even the most confident provocateurs in the house were reminded that the social game had consequences. Elizabeth and Andre, who had found themselves caught in the middle of escalating tensions, were noticeably subdued. Their credibility had taken a hit, and they seemed acutely aware of how their reactions, or lack thereof, would be judged in the coming days. It was a lesson in restraint and timing. Even a single word or gesture could shift perception dramatically. Lauren and Kara, who had mostly observed from the sidelines, took mental stock of the evening's events. What did they learn about trust, influence, and the fragile balance of alliances? Could they step in at the right moment to gain favor, or would their silence be interpreted as weakness? These subtle calculations shaped the undercurrent of strategy that ran beneath every conversation. As emotions swirled, small signs of relief emerged. Some housemates laughed quietly at awkward moments. Others exhaled with the satisfaction of having spoken their truth. Yet, there was no escaping the lingering sense of unresolved tension. Everyone knew that the real consequences were yet to arrive. The power shifts, subtle betrayals, and fractured alliances had set the stage for an even more dramatic revelation. Would you handle this confrontation differently, or would you react the same way under public scrutiny? Could you maintain control when every word and action is scrutinized by friends, allies, and rivals alike? The House had shown that even minor provocations could explode into high stakes drama, and the emotional fallout was just the beginning. One decision is coming that will force a choice no one is ready for, and when it lands, the consequences will ripple through the entire house. The night in the house reached a fever pitch, and it became clear that nothing would return to the tentative calm from earlier. Gino's confrontation with Jasmine had left ripples across the entire group, changing the unspoken balance of power. Everyone was taking stock of what had been said, who had overstepped, and who had gained influence. There was a sense that the episode's events weren't just isolated conflicts, they were shaping the social hierarchy for the next round of interactions. Gino walked through the living area, quiet but purposeful. His demeanor suggested a mix of frustration and resolution. He had defended himself and set clear boundaries, yet the question lingered. Would his actions earn respect or provoke further retaliation? From a behavioral perspective, standing firm in the face of betrayal is both risky and necessary, especially in a house where alliances are fluid and gossip can tip the scales instantly. His choice to address the situation head-on was bold, but also guaranteed more drama in the days to come. Jasmine, on the other hand, retreated strategically. Her playful, manipulative tactics had met their match in Gino's assertiveness, and the tension between confidence and accountability became starkly visible. She had to rethink how she presented herself, because every observer in the house had now witnessed her vulnerabilities and missteps. In my opinion, this is a classic example of how charisma can only carry someone so far when trust has been compromised. Meanwhile, the secondary storylines continued to simmer. Julia and Joy, who had stirred earlier conflicts, were quietly recalibrating. Their smiles carried a hint of triumph, but their eyes revealed that they knew the house could shift against them at any moment. Elizabeth and Andre, caught between defending their credibility and avoiding new disputes, realized that maintaining neutrality is nearly impossible in such a charged environment. Every interaction is a strategic choice, and one misstep could undo their careful positioning. Lauren and Kara, the observers turned subtle players, were assessing potential allies and vulnerabilities. The episode highlighted that influence in the house doesn't always come from speaking the loudest. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to act and when to wait. Their calculated silence contrasted sharply with the explosive confrontations around them, proving that patience can be as powerful as aggression in shaping outcomes. By the end of the episode, a new equilibrium began to form, but it was tenuous at best. The fight outcomes had clarified some relationships while deepening fractures in others. Trust had been tested, alliances had shifted, and every character was left pondering the next move. Who would rise in influence? Who would stumble under scrutiny? And who would make a decision that changes everything in the next episode? The house now waited with bated breath. The unresolved tension and emotional fallout guaranteed that the next gathering would not be calm. Fans watching at home were left with questions that demanded answers. Would Jasmine attempt to reclaim her position or retreat further? Can Gino maintain control without alienating potential allies? Which side will fracture first when pressure peaks? Next time, someone finally reaches their limit, and the consequences will hit harder than anyone expects. The episode closed on this precarious note, leaving the audience on edge, emotionally invested, and eager to see how fractured loyalties, hidden agendas, and unresolved grudges will collide in the next chapter. Every choice made tonight is a setup for tomorrow's storm, and viewers are left wondering whose strategy will pay off and whose will crumble under the pressure.